My husband asked me to sign away control of my inheritance with his hand resting on my knee, like we were picking a paint color for the kitchen. He smiled at me in front of 3 attorneys and said, "If you still trust me, Maren, sign it." What he didn't know was that I'd had his files for almost 3 weeks. Every email, every timeline, every ugly little note proving our 7-year marriage had been planned around my father's company shares, my trust, and the properties my family built from nothing. My name is Maren Voss. I'm 36 now, and I'm the only child of a man who got rich the exhausting way. My dad, Anders Voss, started a logistics software company in a rented office over a dentist's clinic in Phoenix. My mom handled payroll in the beginning, then operations, then basically everything no one else wanted to touch. They weren't old money. There were no portraits in a hallway, no country club stories, no family estate with a locked gate. There was just a stubborn founder, a used coffee machine, and a mother who could scare venture capitalists by raising one eyebrow. By the time I was in college, the company had turned into something real. By my late 20s, it had gone public. My parents also bought commercial buildings, apartment complexes, and a few pieces of land around Arizona and Colorado through holding companies. My dad used to say, "Never let one success make you stupid." So when he got sick, he made sure my inheritance was wrapped in a trust with more locks than a bank vault. That part matters. When he died, there was a will reading, but it wasn't one of those dramatic inheritance stories where somebody gasps because of a secret will. My dad was too organized for that. The estate plan had been explained to me before he passed. I inherited economic rights to a block of company shares worth around $40 million at the time, plus interests in several properties. But the voting rights, transfers, management rights, and spousal access were heavily restricted. My dad trusted me. He just didn't trust the world around me. At the time, I thought that was insulting. I was already with Grant then. Grant Kellen. Tall, calm, clean-cut, the kind of man who looked good in a navy sweater and somehow made everyone feel like he was the reasonable one in the room. He wasn't flashy. He didn't ask me to buy him watches or cars. He hated being photographed. He remembered small things like how I couldn't sleep the night before my dad's scans, and how I liked peppermint tea only if it was steeped too long and tasted almost bitter. The first time my dad met him, he was polite but quiet afterward. Later in the kitchen, he said, "He listens very carefully." I laughed and said, "That's usually considered a good thing, Dad." He dried his hands on a towel and looked out the window. Usually. I hated that. I really did. I thought my family saw every man around me as a predator because of the money. I thought they couldn't accept that somebody could love me without wanting anything from me. Grant understood that wound better than anyone. He'd say, "I married you, not your last name," and I believed him. God, I believed him so hard, it embarrasses me to admit it now. After my dad died, my trust attorney, Laurel Chen, wanted to tighten several provisions before the wedding. Grant never raised his voice. He never demanded anything. He just got quiet in this wounded way that made me feel like I had slapped him. One night he said, "I'm not asking for your money. I'm asking not to be treated like a thief before I've done anything wrong." So I called Laurel the next morning and told her to stop being so aggressive. She said, "Maren, my job is to protect you." I snapped, "From my husband?" There was a pause. Not a dramatic pause. Just the kind where somebody decides not to say the thing they're thinking. She said, "From pressure, whoever it comes from." I hung up feeling righteous. That's the part that still gets me. I wasn't some helpless idiot. I was running foundation projects, sitting in shareholder meetings, reviewing real estate reports. I could read a term sheet. I could spot nonsense in a board deck. But at home, with Grant, I wanted to be a woman, not an asset under management. So I kept choosing him. When my best friend Tessa asked why Grant kept wanting details about the trust, I told her she was being paranoid. She said, "He asked me whether your voting rights unlock if you've been married 5 years. I remember rolling my eyes. He probably doesn't even know what that means. Tessa looked at me across the brunch table and said quietly, "Maren, He knew exactly what it meant. We didn't speak for almost 4 months after that. I told myself she was jealous or protective in a toxic family drama kind of way, or maybe just suspicious because everyone around wealth gets weird. Grant didn't tell me to cut her off. That would have been too obvious. He just said, "It hurts watching people make you afraid of your own happiness." That sentence did a lot of damage. The trigger came 7 years into our marriage, and it looked boring from the outside. Grant wanted me to attend a family asset continuity meeting with Laurel, 2 advisors from the company, and a transactional attorney he'd recently started using. He said it was just about efficiency. The properties were getting harder to manage. The shares created tax headaches. There were insurance policies, maintenance budgets, tenant disputes, board notices. He'd been helping informally for years, so why not formalize it? "Not ownership," he said, sitting on the edge of our bed one night. "Just management authority in certain areas. You're exhausted, Mare. Let me carry more." I was tired. He knew that. My mom had passed 18 months earlier, and grief had made every routine thing feel heavier. Grant had been perfect through it. He arranged meals, drove me to meetings, sat outside my mother's room when I couldn't go in. He held me after the hospice nurse left. So when he said, "Let me carry more," it landed exactly where he wanted. Still, something felt off. The first draft he gave me was called a Spousal Asset Management and Continuity Agreement. It sounded harmless in that expensive legal way. But when I asked Laurel to review it, she called me within an hour. "Where did this come from?" "Grant's attorney drafted it." "What attorney?" "Nolan Price. I think he does business structuring." She exhaled. "Maren, don't sign anything. Not a revised version. Not a memo. Not an acknowledgement that you received it. Nothing." I got defensive immediately, because that had become my reflex. "Laurel. No, listen to me. This doesn't just let Grant help with properties. It gives him practical control over distributions, asset decisions, voting recommendations, and debt approval through a side structure. It's dressed up as administrative support, but it's not that." I stood in my closet with one heel in my hand and the other still on my foot. "You think he's trying to take my inheritance?" "I think someone wrote this for a very specific outcome." I didn't tell Grant she'd said that. I said Laurel needed more time. He didn't get angry. That made it worse. He walked up behind me while I was brushing my teeth, wrapped his arms around my waist, and kissed my shoulder. "Of course," he said. "I know Laurel has trouble trusting anyone who didn't grow up in your world." That was the old hook. The class thing. The, "they hate me because I'm not one of them" thing. Except my family hadn't been born wealthy either. I looked at him in the mirror, toothpaste foam in my mouth, and for 1 second I saw something I didn't like. Not rage, not panic, calculation. His face adjusted too quickly. Ew. 2 days later, Laurel asked me to come to her office alone. I almost didn't go. I sat in my car in the parking garage for 10 minutes with my hands on the wheel, telling myself this was how marriages get poisoned. One suspicious attorney, one overprotective friend, one tired woman who starts seeing betrayal in every folder. When I got upstairs, Laurel wasn't alone. A man in a gray suit stood by the window holding a paper cup of coffee he clearly hadn't touched. "This is Nolan Price," Laurel said. Grant's attorney looked smaller than I expected. Not physically, just less polished. There were purple half-moons under his eyes. I said, "Why is my husband's lawyer in my trust attorney's office?" Nolan swallowed. "I'm no longer representing Grant." Laurel motioned for me to sit. I didn't. Nolan placed a slim envelope on the table. "I'm not here to violate privilege for sport," he said. "I'm here because I believe my services were being used to further a fraudulent scheme and because your signature was being sought under false pretenses." It sounded fake, like dialogue from a show Grant would pause and criticize for being unrealistic. I said, "No." Nolan blinked. I said it again. "No. Grant wouldn't do this." Laurel didn't argue. She opened a laptop and turned it toward me. The first file name was Subject, Maren Voss. Under it were folders. Phase 1, Emotional Entry. Phase 2, Trust displacement. Phase 3. Spousal control. Phase 4. Asset access. Phase 5. Exit position. I remember the hum of Laurel's office air conditioner. I remember Nolan's coffee cup bending slightly in his hand. I remember thinking the font looked stupidly normal for something that was about to ruin my life. Laurel clicked the first folder. There were screenshots of my old interviews from when my dad's company went public. A transcript from a podcast where I talked about hating my birthday because investors used to send gifts to our house. Property records, news articles, my LinkedIn, my mother's obituary, a note about Tessa, high influence, likely obstruction, emotional framing recommended. Then there were notes about me, prefers low-status signaling in romantic partners, suspicious of luxury requests, responds negatively to overt interest in inheritance, father as primary trust influence. Key vulnerability, fears being loved for money/name, suggested positioning, humble, patient, emotionally safe, non-materialistic. I didn't cry then. I actually laughed once, this ugly little sound that made Nolan look down. Because I saw the peppermint tea, oversteeped. Mentioned casually during early date 3 or 4. Grant had brought me peppermint tea on our 4th date after I said I was too wired to sleep. I thought it was sweet. I told that story at our wedding rehearsal dinner. There was also a draft message from Grant to Nolan, dated before our first official date. She responds best when she feels chosen despite the money. Need to avoid appearing curious about trust too early. I sat down because my knees started doing something embarrassing. Laurel said my name, but she sounded far away. Nolan explained carefully that Grant had approached him years earlier for asset integration planning before we were married. Nolan claimed he thought it was premature estate planning for a future spouse. Maybe that was true. Maybe it wasn't. I don't know. What made him come forward was a more recent email from Grant about timing the management agreement before certain trust review provisions expired. The email said, "Once she signs, the marriage becomes optional." That line still lives in my head. Not "will be secure," not "we can build a future." The marriage becomes optional. I asked Nolan, "Why now?" He rubbed his thumb along the seam of the coffee cup. "Because he started asking me to backdate advisory notes and characterize prior conversations with you that never happened. I won't be the fall guy." So no, he wasn't a hero. He was saving himself. At that moment, I didn't care. I needed the truth more than I needed his motives to be clean. Laurel told me we had options, but we needed to move quietly. If I confronted Grant too early, he could destroy documents, move money, or claim I was unstable. The trust could freeze anything connected to him, but the strongest position would be letting him proceed far enough that the pressure, the false pretenses, and the intent were clear. "You want me to go home to him?" I asked. Laurel's face softened. "I'm sorry." I drove home with copies of the files in an encrypted drive inside my purse. Grant was making salmon in the kitchen. He had music playing low. He kissed my forehead and asked, "Long day, baby?" Baby. I used to love how he said it. I stood there with my coat still on and thought, this man knows exactly how I take my tea because he researched the most efficient way to make me feel safe. I wanted to throw up. Instead, I said, "Yeah, just tired." For the next 2.5 weeks, I lived inside the strangest performance of my life. Grant slept beside me. Grant rubbed my back when I pretended to have a headache. Grant sent me photos of a stray cat that hung around his office because he knew I loved animals. Every loving gesture became evidence in my head, and I hated that too, because some part of me kept looking for one real thing. That's the humiliating part of this inheritance story. Even after I saw the files, I kept hoping there was a misunderstanding big enough to crawl into. I tested him once. I said, "Maybe we should delay the agreement until next quarter." He didn't even blink. "Absolutely," he said. Relief hit me so fast I almost cried. Then he added gently, "I just worry Laurel is making you afraid of me. And once people put that fear in your head, they don't stop. They get paid to keep you isolated." There it was. Same tool, cleaner blade. I said, "You think Laurel isolates me?" He gave a sad little smile. "I think money does. I think your family built walls around you and called it protection." The cruelty of it was that part of me agreed. My whole life, people had treated me like my last name entered rooms before I did. Grant had made himself the one place where I didn't feel like a balance sheet. And he had done it by reading the balance sheet. Laurel, Nolan, and our forensic accountant built the paper trail while I played wife. They found reimbursements routed through one of Grant's consulting LLCs, small at first. Advisory support. Property coordination. Travel related to asset review. He hadn't stolen millions, not yet. But he had quietly billed entities connected to my holdings for work he wasn't authorized to perform. They found draft divorce scenarios on Nolan's old portal. They found a proposed post-integration settlement model. They found notes about how long he'd need to stay married after gaining management authority to make a claim look less predatory. At night, Grant would ask me what I wanted to watch. I'd say, anything. And he'd choose shows we had watched during my mother's chemo, because he knew they made me feel safe. The meeting was scheduled for a Thursday morning at the offices of Voss Meridian Holdings, the company that managed the real estate side of the trust. Not a courtroom. Not a dramatic family dinner. A glass conference room with stale coffee, a screen on the wall, and a view of a parking garage. Grant wore the charcoal suit I bought him for our 5th anniversary. He looked confident, not smug exactly. Warm, like a man about to guide his anxious wife through paperwork. In the room were Laurel, 2 Voss Meridian advisors, an outside accountant, Nolan, and 1 board observer from the company. Grant didn't know Nolan would be there. He stopped just inside the door. "Nolan," he said. Nolan nodded once. "Grant." Grant recovered fast. "I didn't realize this needed to be adversarial." Laurel said, "It doesn't. Please sit." I almost backed down right there. I'm serious. My body wanted the old life so badly it tried to betray me. Grant pulled out my chair the way he always did. His hand brushed my shoulder. I remembered him holding me at my mother's burial, whispering, "I've got you." I had loved him in every room of my grief. That is a hard thing to set on fire. The agreement was placed in front of me. Grant leaned close enough that only I could hear him. "We're okay," he whispered. "Don't let them make this ugly." Then, louder, with that calm, wounded voice I had defended for years, he said, "Maren, if you still trust me, sign it." Everyone went quiet. He thought he had won. I could feel it. He thought the room, the pressure, the history of me defending him, the fear of looking cold and greedy and broken in front of professionals would do what it always did. I picked up the pen. His shoulders relaxed. Then I set it down. "I did trust you," I said. My voice sounded rough, like I had been sick. That was the problem. Grant's face didn't change much, but his eyes moved to Laurel, then Nolan, then back to me. "Maren," he said softly, "what did they tell you?" Not what happened. Not, "Why are you upset?" "What did they tell you?" Laurel slid a printed packet across the table. The top page read, "Subject, Maren Voss." Grant looked at it for half a second too long. I said, "You made folders." He forced a laugh. "Okay. This is being taken wildly out of context." Nolan said, "Grant." "Don't," Grant snapped. It was the first sharp sound I'd heard from him in that room. I opened the packet to the page about my father's illness. There was a note in Grant's file from the year before my dad died. Anticipate accelerated emotional dependence during founder decline. Maintain low financial interest posture. I couldn't look at him when I read that part aloud. The board observer muttered, "Jesus." Grant stood. "This is privileged material." Laurel said, "Some of it was disclosed under the crime fraud exception. Some came from non-privileged business records. Some came from Voss Meridian's own accounting systems. Sit down." He didn't sit. He looked at me like I had betrayed him. That almost made me laugh, but I was too tired. "You went behind my back," he said. I nodded. Yes. His mouth opened, then closed. For once, I said, I learned from you. The accountant presented the reimbursements. Nolan confirmed the draft agreement had been designed to shift practical control without triggering the trust's obvious transfer restrictions. Laurel explained that the trust was freezing all pending authority changes, suspending Grant's access to company systems, and preserving records for a civil claim. My divorce attorney, who had been waiting in another office, had already filed the petition that morning. Grant turned to me. Maren, this is insane. I loved you. I made mistakes, okay? I got scared of being powerless in my own marriage. That line might have worked a month earlier. I asked, before our first date? He went still. I tapped the page with the peppermint tea note. You were scared before our first date? He looked away. That was the closest thing to a confession I ever got. The consequences did not happen in one dramatic afternoon. That's not how real life works. Anyone who tells you karma always arrives in one clean scene is selling something. But it came. Grant was removed from every advisory role connected to Voss Meridian. His access to property accounts was shut off. The trust challenged every reimbursement tied to his LLC. The civil claim alleged fraud, undue influence, unjust enrichment, and attempted misappropriation of trust assets. My divorce attorney argued that his financial conduct and premeditated deception should bar him from any claim to assets he had spent years targeting. He fought. Of course he did. First, he said Nolan manipulated the files. Then he said I was emotionally unstable after my mother's death. Then he said Laurel had always hated him. Then he said he only researched my finances because he wanted to understand the responsibilities of being married to me. At one mediation session, he actually said, "You made it impossible for me to feel equal." I looked at the man I had slept next to for 7 years and said, "So you decided to become my manager?" He didn't answer. People who had judged me didn't all suddenly become kind. Some mutual friends disappeared because the story made them uncomfortable. One woman from Grant's circle texted me, "I hope destroying him was worth it." I stared at that message for a long time. Destroying him. As if he had tripped and fallen into a 7-year plan. Tessa came back into my life slowly. I called her first, crying so hard I had to sit on the bathroom floor. The first thing she said was not "I told you so." She said, "Do you want me to come over?" That made me cry harder. The divorce took almost a year. The civil case settled separately after more documents came out in discovery, including old invoices and emails Grant had apparently forgotten were backed up on Nolan's firm's system. He didn't go to prison. This wasn't that kind of revenge story. There was no handcuff scene, no screaming in a courthouse hallway. He lost money, a lot of it. He had to repay disputed reimbursements. His LLC collapsed under legal bills. He lost the condo he had moved into because he couldn't maintain the lease. His professional reputation took a hit because nobody in that business world wanted to hire a man accused of building an acquisition strategy around his wife. The settlement barred him from contacting employees, advisors, or trustees connected to my family assets. In the divorce, he got what he had actually brought into the marriage. Not much. The last time I saw him was outside a conference room after the final settlement conference. He looked thinner. Older, maybe. Or maybe I had finally stopped seeing him through the version of him he built for me. He said, "Was none of it real to you?" I remember that because it was such an unbelievable question. I said, "I was real. You knew that. That's why it worked." He rubbed his face with both hands. "I did love you," he said. Maybe he even believed that by then. People can confuse possession with love if it benefits them long enough. I said, "You loved access." Then I walked away before he could give me another sentence to carry around. Here's the thing people don't understand about a stolen inheritance or attempted stolen inheritance. The money part is awful, yes. The family betrayal, the trust documents, the lawyers, the property records, the civil claims, all of that drains you. It turns your life into folders and invoices and scheduled calls. But the worst part is quieter. It's realizing your memories have been edited without your consent. Our first date. The tea. The night my dad died. The way Grant held my hand during the will reading. The way he told me he didn't care about the company, the properties, the shares, any of it. Those moments didn't disappear. I still remember how they felt. Now I also know what they were attached to. After everything was finalized, Laurel told me, "It's over." We were standing outside the building and the sun was too bright. I nodded like a normal person. I thanked her. I got into my car. I closed the door. Then I cried so hard my chest hurt. Not because I wanted Grant back, not because I regretted fighting. I cried because the man I loved had never existed as a separate person from the plan. I had been grieving a husband, but what I was really grieving was the version of my own life I thought I had lived. That's a weird kind of loss. There's no funeral for it, no casserole, no polite card from people saying they're sorry your marriage was apparently an asset strategy with anniversary trips. I'm rebuilding now, slowly. I sold one property I never liked and used part of the proceeds to start a scholarship under my mother's name. I restructured some of the trust oversight, not because I'm afraid of everyone, but because I'm done confusing love with access. Tessa has a key to my house again. Laurel is still blunt and still usually right, which is annoying. I sleep better some nights. Other nights I remember Grant saying baby in the kitchen, and I have to remind myself that missing how something felt doesn't mean wanting it back. People love to say, karma got him. Maybe it did. But I don't think karma was the court filings or the settlement or the bankruptcy threats. I think karma was simpler than that. Grant spent 7 years trying to inherit my life, and in the end, he lost the only part of it he could never put in a document: my trust. So I'm asking honestly, if you found out your spouse had planned your marriage around your inheritance years before they ever met you, could you ever forgive them? Would you have confronted them right away, or would you have waited and let the paper trail bury them? Let me know what you would have done, because part of me still wonders if I was too cold, and another part of me knows I wasn't cold enough. Thank you for watching, seriously. If you want more inheritance stories and revenge stories like this, please like, subscribe, and share your thoughts in the comments.